members of the public. Welcome to the City of Swan Agenda Forum. I declare the meeting open at 6 p.m. I'd now like to begin with the acknowledgement of country. The City of Swan acknowledges the traditional custodians of this region, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and their descendants. The terms and conditions of entry into this meeting are posted at the entry of the public gallery. Members of the public are advised to read them prior to attending this meeting and abide by them. Next part is apologies. So we have apologies from the Mayor, Councillor Dawn, Councillor Miles, Councillor Zanino and Mr Kane. I believe they are all in Canberra at a conference, and we have leave of absence from Councillor Knight. Mr Acting CEO, is anybody else absent?
An apology from Councillor McCulloch.
And an apology from Councillor McCulloch. Yes, we need to record that. Oh, and thank you. Councillor Singh is attending electronically. Councillor Singh, can you say hello to indicate whether your sound problem is fixed? No, it's not. Never mind. We can carry on like this. Next is declarations of financial and proximity interests and interests affecting impartiality. Councillors, are there any declarations? No, no declarations. Section 5, petitions. Councillor Catalano, you have a petition.
Thank you. We, the undersigned, all being electors of the City of Swan, request the Council for the City of Swan to work with us to beautify and maintain our roundabout and verges in Perella Court, Bennett Springs. And there's 13 signatures on that petition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hand that up.
The process for that is to accept it at the council meeting, I believe. Yes. Next, are there any more petitions from anybody else? No. Next is reports and notices of motion. 6.1, we have additional information from the officers. 14.3.2, Movida Estate Acoustic Wall. Mr Van der Linde, could you explain this?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. The map on page 118 of the agenda, that's the attachment to the Movida report, appears to have had some formatting changed when it was uploaded into digital format. The notations showing the wall have been shifted slightly to the right on the map, and therefore I've emailed all councillors a corrected version of the map earlier today, and if any councillor need that, I do have hard copies available here that I can distribute as well.
Thank you, Mr Van der Linde. So I think that means that dotted line there would be to the left of Blackadder Road. Is that right?
That is correct.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Well, the map that's in the running sheet for tonight's, is that the new version, is it?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Next up, we have 6.2 deputations. In accordance with current procedures for public participation at agenda forums, all requests for in-person deputations were required by 5 p.m. Tuesday, July the 2nd, and all written deputations received by 3 p.m. Tuesday, July the 2nd were circulated with the preliminary agenda on Tuesday evening. 14.3.1, proposed local shopping centre, lot 750, number 877 Farrell Road, Janebrook, DA 571-22. We have an in-person deputation from Mr Carlo Famiano. Thank you, Mr Famiano. If you can introduce yourself, please. Yeah, if you press the right button.
Thank you. My name's Carlo Famiano from CF Town Planning and Development. I'm speaking on behalf of the landowners for 877 Farrell Road in Jane Brook. The application is proposing a local shopping centre on this site. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to the city staff for the great work that they've done through the process. We have been working on this since August 2022, and we've gone through several meetings, several DRP meetings, to try and get this design that we have tonight. And to be honest, and to be, we're grateful for the DRP process, because if we look at the very original design that was presented to the city, it wasn't the best. And through that DRP process, we managed to get this to be certainly a better outcome for the local community. And we've managed to get some little piazzas in there and some cafes and things like that. So it will become a community hub and a focal point for this part of Jane Brook. The planning process, as you're aware, has set aside this site for a local shopping centre for some time in the ODP. There has been a number of approvals granted by the city in the past for this site for a shopping centre, but none of them were ever built. The new landowner is keen to build this one. So we're certainly happy with the recommendation in which the staff have put forward tonight and for the council meeting. And we've gone through the conditions and raised no objections or any concerns with the conditions being imposed. So we're all supportive of that. Through the process of designing and redesigning of this development, we did take into account a number of comments that the city had given us in regards to design and usability and connectivity with the street. But we also looked at the submissions received from the local residents. And we made changes to those plans to try and address some of those concerns. Obviously, we couldn't address all of the concerns, and we know that, and we're aware that tonight there is a written submission put in objecting to a shopping centre on this site, that the objector does not want this site to be a shopping centre. We appreciate that, and we appreciate those concerns and note those concerns, but the site has been set aside for a shopping centre, and it has gone through that process, and the planning framework allows for a shopping centre. So to conclude, certainly supportive of the officer level recommendation, thank the staff for their work, and hopefully council sees merit in this application and grants approval. Any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Famiani. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Howlett.
Do I have to press a button?
Thank you. Thanks for your your deputation. On page 125 of the agenda, it relates to parking and a fast food outlet. I just got to get to that page so I can. So the applicant says that shared parking could be considered between the uses, as the peak period of the restaurant, cafe and fast food outlet being after 5:30 would be different to the shop use. So I'm just wondering, could you elaborate on what type of fast food outlet you have in mind, and whether or not it might incorporate a drive-through aspect?
Yes, certainly. We haven't settled on any tenants at this point in time, so we envisage there to be most likely within these types of small shopping centres, you would have a fish and chip store or a pizza store or a kebab store. The design does not allow for a drive-through, so there's not going to be a McDonald's or a Hungry Jack's or anything like that, no.
Great, thank you. And just one more question. I think that you sort of quite rightly say the design reflects much more community-centric with the piazza development through the middle. I'm wondering if the owner perhaps might consider one of the tenancies lending itself to a community hub type space, potentially for local Jane Brook community groups to meet in, noting that there is no actual community centre in Jane Brook, that might lend itself quite well, and it might look favourably upon the local residents.
Certainly the landowner's in the room tonight, so he's probably heard all of that. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that's something on his agenda. Like I said, we haven't booked in any tenants or confirmed any tenants for the site as yet. We're just trying to get through the approval process. But, yeah, certainly that's something that the landowner can take on board. Thank you.
Next up is Councillor Bowman.
Thank you. The landscaping plan on the verge, I understand you advised staff on the 7th of June that the owner of the land will install and maintain the landscaping on Farrell Road verge. Is that correct? And would you be okay with the condition of such being in the application?
Yeah, we did discuss this with the city staff. So the landowner has confirmed that they will be putting that landscaping in and maintaining it, and didn't have an issue with the condition. Obviously, landscaping forms an important part of the centre to make sure that it looks good and it doesn't look run down. So, yeah.
On page 11 of your application, you state, and it's on page 152, councillors, the provision of mature trees. Are you providing mature trees?
The landscaping plan at the end of the day would need to be approved by the city's parks department. So, yeah, and we do intend to put some of those mature trees in. So, yeah.
So would you, again, have any problems if a condition was placed that they were to be mature trees?
There's, yeah.
With the parking in your application, I notice you say you're providing better parking, trees for the parking of 1 tree per 4 bay, where the requirement is 1 per 6. Is that 1 tree per 4 bays for all the parking, or only for those parking abutting the reserve area?
It's whatever's on the landscaping plan is what we've put in at the moment. The bays that are up against the shopping centre, obviously it's a bit more difficult to try and put trees in abutting the shopping centre and stuff, because you've got a footpath to worry about, got awnings to worry about, and there's a few other issues in regards to clearances from the actual parapets and buildings of the building itself with the trees. So on the reserve side, definitely, because there's enough space there for the trees to grow, root-wise and canopy-wise.
So therefore, the 34 bays abutting the shopping centre, if I read the landscaping plan correctly, has no trees provided. Is that correct?
I'll need to have a look at the landscaping plan. Sorry, I'll just revert back to that. And it didn't print out for me.
Maybe if you could come back to us, I'm happy.
Yeah, that's fine. I can email through to the city if need be, but the landscaping plan would need to be signed off by the city staff anyway. So.
And just a question of, I notice it's 1,050 square metres, and I've been provided a value of development is 1.405 million. Is that correct? 'Cause it seems very low for that size building.
That's what I've been advised by the client, so I have to run with that. He is the builder.
And I have a question of staff later on.
Okay. Do any other councillors have a question? Councillor Catalano.
Thanks. Yeah, just on that question of trees, there was a lot of submissions made about the site being, environmentally sensitive because it's adjacent to Jane Brook. And there are a hell of a lot of trees that are put in along streetscapes that actually end up being invasive species in the creek. So, in particular olives, and also these euphorbias that are being planted around the place quite a lot there, they end up basically in the waterways. So I just wonder, do you think you can get your tree species kind of worked out by the end of, by the meeting next week, so we don't have to kind of get into too much discussion about it?
Look, I'd prefer that a condition be imposed saying that a landscaping plan be approved by the city staff prior to the issuance of a building licence, just so that we can sit down with the city's parks department and get the right species in the right place. That's probably the best way to do it. And we are going to put the landscaping in, and it will be to the satisfaction of the city. So we'll go through the city's parks department.
All right, well, I'll ask Mr. Russell about that then. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you.
Councillors, are there any more questions of Mr. Famiano? No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Famiano. And next up, we have a written deputation, 14.3.2, proposed modification to amendment number 195 to local planning scheme number 17 to rezone lot 912 Midland Road, Bushmead, from unzoned to special use zone number 14 LPS 17195. Read that at your leisure, councillors. Next item is 14.4.1, Kings Meadow Oval Foreshore Restoration, and we have an in-person deputation from Mr. Andrew Day. Mr. Day, if you could come up and introduce yourself.
Good evening all. Yep, Andrew Day. As a local resident and ratepayer, I oppose the option 2B proposal for Kings Meadow Reserve. I see a number of issues. Firstly, if option 2B goes ahead, it'll be very hard to reverse it in the future if an opportunity arises to develop the foreshore into its full potential. Based on comments from the city's report, it appears that a new wall with a more developed plan, being option 3 or 4, were preferred by the majority of residents surveyed. This being the case, option 2B will not be in the best interest of those surveyed, and I expect significant angst amongst local residents when they realise what's been decided. I only found out about the recommendation 2 days ago, and I was quite shocked. Secondly, Kings Meadow Reserve is a haven for hoons, loitering, squatters, illegal activity, including drug use and dumping of household waste and furniture. Locals have been lobbying council and local authorities for years now to address these issues, to no avail. If option 2B goes ahead, I fear it will only exacerbate these issues. There will be far less general public using the space, as there will be nowhere to fish, no decent playground or barbecue facilities, and no views of the river. This, along with the fact that the area is rarely patrolled by the police, will make it the perfect space for illegal and antisocial activities, making it unsafe and undesirable for residents to use the area. Thirdly, from the council's recommendations, it appears that overall the surveyed responses were more in favour of options 3 and 4, a wall and improved amenities. These options were subsequently taken off the table. It would be unreasonable not to go back to the residents advising that these options are now off the table, given the scale and impact of the proposed changes. By offering further consultation, it would at least give everyone some time to come up with a better solution. Fourthly, Kings Meadow Reserve is unique in that it is one of only a few public areas in Guildford that offer direct access to the river, and the only public area that has uninterrupted views of the Swan and Helena rivers. If this proposal goes ahead, that natural and unique drawcard will be lost forever. Pardon me. It's for these reasons that until there is further public consultation, I believe that council would be better off implementing option 1 and do nothing. As an extension to this, I would also suggest installing a lockable boom gate and fence at the entrance of the reserve at the end of Hill Street. By preventing vehicle access, it would go a long way to solving the antisocial and illegal activities that regularly occur at the reserve. It would also deter fishermen if they can't drive to the other side of the reserve, which is a positive, as the wall in its current state is seen as a hazard, as highlighted in the report. An opening could be left between the gate and the fence to allow cyclists, dog walkers, joggers and people on foot to access the reserve, somewhat like Guildford polo fields. As far as costs go, if there are no vehicles using the dirt road and car park, it would ultimately save the council money, as they would no longer have to maintain those areas, certainly not as frequently anyway. There are other great examples of what can be done at a riverfront location in neighbouring suburbs such as Bassendean, the Sandy Beach Reserve, Bayswater, Riverside Gardens and at Woodbridge Park. Sadly, Guildford has nothing like this to offer its residents, or for that matter, visitors to the area. Kings Meadow Reserve is a perfect location. I only hope the City of Swan has the vision to utilise the space properly in the future. Until then, I, along with many of my neighbours, oppose the proposed changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Councillors, does anybody have a question of Mr. Day? Councillor Prodovnik.
Hello, Andrew. Are you able to email over your deputation? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Councillor Howlett.
Thanks, Andrew. I just, two things that in your deputation I was interested in. One, you said that if we go ahead with option 2B, that we'll be losing the views or the... Can you just expand on how... I can't see on the images how... I just want to understand what you mean by that a bit more, please.
The way I read I may have got it wrong, but the way I read the proposal, it actually said that views would be lost, but ultimately it would frame the river. So in my mind, I only read the proposal 2 days ago, so I don't know. And in fact, when I downloaded for some reason the full document didn't come through, so maybe I didn't read the full information on it. But yeah, from what I understand, the vegetation that's going in will block the view of the river.
And I guess my second question was, I think is suggesting potentially restricting access or vehicle access at the bottom of Hill Street. Do you think that might cause some parking issues along Hill Street and sort of back up into Guildford if people...
I did think about that. I mean, if it was a lockable gate, it's something that could be opened up, like for instance at the polo fields when they open the gates there, and you know if there's an event on or something like that, so you'd still be able to open it up for events or for other activities that might happen. But for now and for the last 10, 15 years, there's been nothing. So the only people that have been there, or the majority of people that I see as a resident, are antisocial behaviour, hoons, people using the dirt track as a race track. Vehicles have been burnt out down there, all kinds of nasty things going on. So, you get your fishermen down there, obviously, and the way the wall is, I guess you don't want to encourage that at the moment. There is a fence up there at the moment, temporary fence, but I'm just concerned that once you plant a lot of vegetation along the waterway there and take that view away down the track, you're not going to be able to take that back. You're not going to be able to put a proposal in to remove the trees. That's not going to wash with the council, I'm sure. So at least give the residents a bit more time to digest what could potentially be, a big impact for that space, which I think has massive potential.
That's great, thank you. So yeah, if you could get your deputation in, we'd all have a way to...
So who would I email that to, the city?
Yeah, just to the city, and they can send it to all councillors. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Councillors, are there any more questions of Mr. Day? No. Looks like, thank you very much, Mr. Day. Thank you for your deputation. Now we move on to councillor questions in regard to items on the agenda, and the first up is Councillor Bowman with 14.3.1.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to staff. Following on from my questions that I asked the planning consultant, can council, or is it available to council to modify one of the conditions of the landscaping plan that requires mature trees and also increases the number of trees in the parking area to comply with our planning condition, which is 1 in 6, noting that there's not 1 in 6 there at the moment?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, short answer is yes, it's possible to do that.
And my second question is, with the valuation of DAs, when they're submitted, and in this example it seems extremely low, do we look at that, or we just take that on face value? And it's just a question.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, generally we take that at face value. In the past, this city has questioned the value of a development. The process we took in that instance was to engage a separate quantity surveyor to cost up the estimated cost of the development based on the plan submitted, and as that transpired, the answer was that the cost indicated on the application form were about accurate. You can do it. Local governments from time to time in WA have done it, and I'm not aware of too many instances where anyone has caught out an applicant in falsifying, deliberately or otherwise, the estimated cost of development on an application form.
Thank you. Carry on.
The final follow-up question to that, so would that have been the same situation what happened with the over 55s in Henley Brook, where they substantially underestimated the value of the DA and then got changed? Or is that a different sort of matter because it was a development?
Through Mr. Mayor, I'm not quite clear which instance are we talking about?
Could you clarify your question, Councillor Bowman? Yeah.
It was the over 55s. I referred to it as the trailer park at the time because the value of each property was only going to be $10,000, which we later found out it wasn't. I forget the name of the company. It's in the Henley Brook area off of Brooklands Drive, I believe.
Thank you, Mr Acting Mayor. Yeah, my recollection of that incident is that there was a difference in the scope of what they're actually applying for under the development application versus the rest of the development that wasn't subject to a planning approval. I think that was the accounted for the discrepancy in estimating the actual cost of the development.
I think next up is Councillor Catalano.
Yeah, thanks. Mr Russell, with the Jane Brook one, so sorry, the next stage after this is it goes to planning approval, is that correct? I just wanted to get the terminology right. What's the next stage?
No, through you, Mr Acting Mayor, this is the planning application for planning approval.
This is the
in front of
development
us.
application?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, but what's the next one where you're going to give them advice about what trees to plant and all that? What do you call that again?
The if council sees fit to issue an approval with conditions, what's being mooted here is an approval with various conditions, including provision of a landscaping plan to our satisfaction for us to subsequently approve as part of the condition of any overall.
Sorry, that wasn't my question. My question was, what's the next stage that was referred to by the proponent? Because I just suddenly have forgotten it. So I just wonder if you would remind me of what the next stage is that he was referring to in terms of the kind of trees that might be agreed by the city and him, please.
Prior to the issue of a building permit. So if they
Building
receive
permit.
a planning
Oh, so it's a
approval,
building permit.
then they subsequently submit an application for a building permit.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that clear. So my real question to you then is it better, because you've elaborated about the condition at this stage now, or is it better for us to get some conditions in about the kind of trees that would not be suitable to be planted on this site because of the high chances that they'll become invasive species into Jane Brook, or should we just leave that to the building permit stage? What's your advice on that?
Through Mr Acting Mayor, I suppose you're getting to the point where you're talking about an operational matter. Look, it is possible, and I'm quite open to the fact that if we have a condition in relation to landscaping, and I think Councillor Bowman has foreshadowed the possibility of stipulating, or in the condition, extra numbers of trees in certain locations, and that they be mature trees. If you are looking at a preference for particular types of species, or more importantly, to avoid certain types of species, because of the potential of those being invasive to the adjoining Jane Brook Reserve, then I'm quite happy for to take any email advice from anyone that might indicate, and certainly through yourself, Councillor Catalano, that might say, well, look, as a note, we think these types of species aren't appropriate in this locality, and we can ensure that those types of species are not put forward in the landscaping plan.
Great, thank you.
Councillors, are there any? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. In regard to the question of a mature tree, a rather vague term, because if, let's say it's been raised in a pot and it gets to a certain stage where it's not going to grow anymore, you could say it's mature in the pot. Whereas if it was grown in the ground, it might reach 4 or 5 metres or something and be potentially mature. I'd like to get some understanding of what mature means, because frankly, you grow one in the ground and you have to take it away and transplant it, and there's a lot of trees on this plan. They cost thousands of dollars. So I want to know how much we might be impacting the applicant in that regard and how we're going to define mature.
Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr Acting Mayor. It's open to the council in the landscaping plan or for staff to look at what the size is in the planting. So you take a particular species and it might be planted at not from a seedling, of course, but from a certain size in a tube stock that goes into the ground. And then and when we say it's mature, it will be the size in which it ordinarily would grow to in nature. So if you talk about a mature tree having a certain species having 5 metres mature height, that will be the top out height you'd expect for that tree once it's fully grown.
Okay, well, I won't be supporting that. In regard to this application, I've got questions on some other matters.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Under 4.1.1, sport floodlighting, I've already had some discussion with staff about that, so I won't bore you with the detail on that now, other than to say that I may be doing something with that at the meeting.
This is floodlighting.
Floodlighting, yes. And under 4.1.2, on page 13, about halfway down, it refers to the working group recommended that the policy be repealed. Well, I don't recall any input from me as a councillor or the like. Who is this mysterious working group?
Mr. Acting CEO. The question is about the volunteering policy. Who is the working group?
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Stanton will be able to provide advice on that one.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the working group is an internal working group that's looking at the city's approach to supporting volunteering.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Okay, given that, I'll be moving to retain the volunteer policy, and I don't know if there'll be any changes other than to retain it.
Councillors, are there any more questions? Councillor Catalano.
Thank you. In regard to 14.3.2, which is the Bushmead item, I've got a few questions for Mr. Russell. It all pretty much refers to page 269. Now, there is this requirement for Cardinia Brook Foreshore Management Plan. Oh, no, sorry. First of all, requirement for a vegetation and fauna habitat enhancement and management plan. And then it's got to be retained and managed in a way that is best practice and enhances potential habitat opportunities. Who is going to manage it?
Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. The management plan will be prepared by the applicant.
Yep.
Both management plans will be prepared by the applicant,
approved
by the city on the advice of the EPA and environmental agencies.
Yeah.
And to the extent that the management plan has actions that might be on land that will be, I suppose, if it's land that's ultimately going to be ceded or given up, gifted assets, public open space or other reserves or road reserves, ultimately it would be managed by the city. Unless you have vegetation that is being retained in some form in private ownership within private lots, whereby the proponent to implement the management plan may pursue covenants in relation to those lot titles to conserve the vegetation. So it depends ultimately on the findings of where those species or areas are that need to be retained and whether they will be in private land or in public ownership. Public ownership will ultimately be the city. Private ownership, if it's in private lots, it will be the responsibility of the lot owners.
Okay, right. So ultimately, if it's in public ownership, it'll be the city. Right. So the foreshore management plan, which they refer to, which is referred to for Cardinia Brook, how are we going to? Who's going to be enforcing that? And the same question is, I mean, is that going to be privately owned or is that going to be publicly owned? And who's going to enforce that foreshore management plan? Because I know there's one other foreshore management plan in Bennett Springs that is not being managed or enforced. So I'm just wondering how enforceable this management plan idea is.
Perhaps in answering that, Mr Deputy Mayor, let me illustrate the comparative differences between the example Councillor Catalano gave an example here. The management of the Shri Temple in Bennett Springs, the management of that in terms of foreshore management plan relates to that part of the Brookhill tributary on private land. So the obligation to manage that resides with the private landowner, who must comply with conditions of development approval imposed by the city. In relation to this here, as I indicated in the answer to the previous question, if it is works that will be on land that is ultimately gifted to the city, then we will be managing it in accordance with any foreshore management plan. So the differences in the circumstances are significant in that one is the operational management, or if you prefer perhaps the non-management, depending on your view, of an activity on private land, versus the instance here would be looking at actions and implementation of works on public land managed under the care, control and management of the city.
So then the question is this Continue Brook area going to be public open space? Is it going to be gifted to the city? I couldn't work it out from these maps that are available to us here tonight. Maybe you could just let me know if it is.
Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor. That's a fair point. That detail is not in these documents because that detail would be determined at the subsequent structure planning stage, where you'll have a plan that will indicate public open space areas, foreshore areas, private areas, roads and the rest of it. That's not what this instrument is about at this stage. This instrument is to rezone the land from its current unzoned status that came about when the West Australian Planning Commission removed the regional reservation formerly existing on the land so that it could be sold for private treaty, now bought by Development WA. So we need to put a zoning over this land. You can't have unzoned land. That's a chaos situation, and you don't want that in planning. You've got to have zoned land, so we have to have a zone reflective of its designation under the Metropolitan Region Scheme. And this special use zone is the zone appropriate to have the requisite controls heavily orientated towards environmental management that the EPA want for this land. So that's all fair points, but all of that will be determined at the next stage, subsequent to this amendment if it goes through, when the applicant, Development WA, will submit a structure plan that will have all that detail.
Okay, and don't sit down because I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. Otherwise, you're just jumping up and down. What happens if this amendment, if this modification doesn't go through? What actually happens to this piece of land?
Through Mr Deputy Mayor, well, it transpires that will be the scenario that I was actually mentioning to someone today. You will be in what I term planning limbo. And planning limbo, and it can happen, planning limbo is where you have an amendment that needs to happen to zone land under a local planning scheme, but if it can't move through the legislative processes of an amendment happening to a local planning scheme, because it can't get past the Environmental Protection Authority, who has to say yay or nay whether it's fit to be passed for advertising. If you can't do that, it sits there in planning limbo. So what is imperative here is that we have a set of provisions in this amendment that the EPA is satisfied for them to tick off their obligations under Section 48 of the Environmental Protection Act, which is their regulatory perusal of local planning schemes. So unless that happens, unless it happens, you have an amendment that can't go back and can't go forward. It's in planning limbo.
So what what's the effect of planning limbo? I mean, it just stays there as a piece of land that just basically stays as is.
It's a piece of land that is not zoned,
Yeah,
that has no controls, that's not zoned under a local planning scheme,
yeah,
and has no regulatory arrangements for its development.
yeah. So it just basically stays as is until something is decided. Okay, okay. And finally, the last question. I notice in the report that city staff consider it's unnecessary to reserve portions of Lot 912 for public open space to affect conservation of these environmental features. I couldn't really understand why you wouldn't go ahead and do that now. Why? Why isn't it necessary to reserve those
That is a
portions?
very easy question to answer through you, Mr Deputy Mayor, and the logic is this. If the purpose of a reservation is to have control and management of portions of a land or a piece of land that you've identified through other studies as requiring conservation, then common sense would tell us that what you first need to do is to identify where those areas are and their extent. Zoning or reserving areas of land before you have done that investigation is patently premature and counterproductive for the intent of conservation. You first have the studies on site that identify what is where and how much, and once you've done that to everyone's satisfaction, then you designate, if that's the approach, then you designate the extent of the area of land that's required for a reservation for public open space. You do not put the cart before the horse, Mr.
Okay, so just to confirm then, so what you're saying is that there's been no environmental assessments done on that area that in Lot 912. Is that what you're saying? There hasn't been any kind of assessment?
Through Mr Deputy Mayor, I wouldn't put it thus.
What would you
The
put it as?
proponents have done some work, but that is not work that has been formally submitted for approval through a regulatory process. So they haven't gone into this blind. They've done a degree of work, but the EPA have said we would like to see more controls for management plans of the type articulated in the proposed provisions. And the City of Swan will tick off that, but critically with our advice. And I can tell you this, if it was me overseeing those plans, I would be leaning very heavily on the expertise of the EPA and saying this is acceptable or this isn't. So it's not that the proponent hasn't done anything, but they haven't done enough yet to get over the hurdle. And so that's what these provisions are about, in saying that you need to provide this and then you need to have it endorsed, and then subsequently that will be implemented.
Just then, who's it got to be endorsed by?
As the provisions indicate, the City of Swan on advice of the
Yeah.
EPA.
Okay, all right, good, thanks. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Russell, for those very interesting answers, and thank you, Councillor Catalano, for the questions. Does any other councillor have any questions? Councillor Bowman.
Mine are regarding confidential items.
Okay. Do any other councillors have any public questions? I do. So I'd like to ask a question about the Kings Meadow foreshore. So obviously a question of staff. We heard from Mr Day about antisocial behaviour in the area. Does the city have any CCTV in that area, through Mr CEO?
Mr Stanton.
Through you, Mr Deputy Mayor, I don't believe the city does have any CCTV within that area. However, I'm aware that the mobile CCTV has been rotated through there.
Okay, and would it be possible to install more permanent CCTV in that area?
The city receives a significant amount of requests for CCTV, so whenever we get those requests, we do an assessment of the area, and then there's also a cost-benefit analysis which needs to occur as well.
Okay, understood. And given there have been a lot of complaints from that area, what patrol activity is done by our rangers down there?
Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, generally the ranger team do conduct patrols when they're aware that there's an ongoing or hotspot issue. However, if there's ongoing occasions of antisocial behaviour or other criminal activity, then the city also works closely with WA Police to try and address those issues and also have a increased police patrol of those areas.
Thank you. And I've got a question about the recommended option, which I believe is 2B, which I think is on page 315 and 316. At least there's a diagram. Mr. CEO, I suppose I should ask put my questions to you, Mr. CEO, as I'm not quite sure who's going to answer this one.
Mr. Jacquina.
Mr. Jacquina. Yeah, my question is, am I right in understanding on page 315 that it says there, beach open recreational access? Is that right? Is that the recommendation?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes.
So the beach is back. This is more or less what it was in 2015. Okay, thank you. Do any other councillors have any questions? In which case, I believe the next step is to go behind closed doors as we have confidential questions. Members of the public gallery, thank you for your attendance. We're now going to go behind closed doors, so I'll have to ask you to leave. Thank you. Out from behind closed doors. On at this point. Councillors, prior to closing this agenda forum, I'd like to let you all know that as of next week's ordinary meeting of Council, we will be commencing use of the electronic voting system. A copy of the process will be handed out to you before leaving tonight. It's on your desk. The governance team are on hand to answer any questions, and we are going to have a trial run. So after the agenda forum is closed, we will stay here and we will just practice it. So the instructions will also be loaded into Docs on Tap in the resources file. There being no further business, I declare the meeting closed at 6:58. Thank you, councillors, and